and an artist, and his work indeed spans between objects, books, texts, performance, and built work. He is a professor in the Department of Architecture at the University of Thessaly, and he has published several books on architecture theory, on urban culture, and on narrative poetry. His architectural and art projects have been internationally published and exhibited, and he has specifically been the co-commissioner of the Greek pavilion at the 12th Architectural Biennale of Venice with a project entitled The Arc. In 2012, and this is the project he will be telling us, in 2014, he started the project Anaximander in Fukushima, which is the project he will be speaking of and around today. And this project was exhibited in Benaki Museum, Athens. So, Zissis, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Emmanuelle. Thank you, Vera, so much for the challenge to be among these very interesting lectures. Looking at the program, it's full of Greek words like gnomonics, canonics, methodics, mnemotechnics. So I feel very comfortable from this part of the side. The bad part is that I am going to speak not in Greek, but in English, and you are going to see why it's bad. Anyway, we will try. And I'm going to read. Let me check. Okay. So, as Emmanuelle said, it's a talk about a project that has finished some time ago. So this distance of time make me kind of impatient to go to things that went on after this project, and so the presentation is going to be part of it is going to be a more recent approach to the same subjects. So the hypothesis we are going to reflect on today is the following. What was called nature, natura, for centuries in the West has been seen from really early times in the pre-Socratic world as nothing more than a technical construction, natura. Haraway's term, nature culture, which is in our view is a metonymy of the term Anthropocene, describes the fact that we cannot deal with nature as an ontological category separate from culture. We claim that the Anthropocene is a time period that doesn't appear in the industrial era, as it is mostly said. It appears deep into the Greek antiquity in the pre-Socratic thinking. We discover it mostly in the textual fragments attributed to the Ionian thinkers, which is one part of the pre-Socrates, extending present deep into the past. In a historic coincidence, these texts appear in the geological period of time when humanity becomes a subject to transform the geological formulation of the earth. And in these terms, in the terms of geological time, historic time is so short that even antiquity becomes an experience of synchrony. Since we got aware that the Anthropocene describes a historic condition for the planet, antiquity has become part of the present. In what sense? In the sense that the formulation of geology by the means of human action, which is tyrannically obvious today, has begun and developed even in the early times of antiquity. Classical antiquity has played a crucial role in conceiving and using the means for extended mineralization. That since then constantly reshape the form of the earth. Technique is the means for that. In the way Anaximander described cosmos, we find out that then in antiquity the universe could already be understood as a metaphor of a technical apparatus. He described the earth as an architectural particle, spondylus, a particle of the column, that we know from the temples, and cosmos as the interior of a mineral furnace, of a clint. In this scheme appears nothing like nature. Cultural objects, such as a column or a furnace, represent the construction of the earth and the construction of cosmos. Here is a furnace of a classical time, a ceramic clint, and here you can see an interior of a contemporary furnace. Today we are going to question those two metaphors, the metaphor of the furnace in reference to the world, cosmos, and the metaphor of the column, a technical stone, in reference to the planet. Our questioning is not a philosophical one. It is rather an operative or a performative approach. In other words, the idea of a column, which is an important particle of our Lebenswelt, we use, helps us conceptualize what we can't see in its wholeness, which is the earth as an object. On the other side, the idea of a furnace, an apparatus which is part of our everyday world, since the early antiquity, can also help us conceptualize the infinity of the sky that covers our bodies from above. The sky becomes more expressive of what is going on up there during the night when we look upon the stars in the dark. Anaximander describes the night sky as a mechanical apparatus like a furnace. Aetius, we don't have original texts, it's Aetius' attribution to Anaximander, this metaphor. The stars are holes in a metal dome where mechanical parts move, metal ones, and through these holes we are watching the burn inside the cosmic furnace. The stars are these holes that we see an exocosmic burn taking place, and this, you see, is an apparatus that is part of my project. You have this machine with holes that if you put your head, you can see the lamp through these holes. It's a strainer, you know, above your head. Coming to the subject of our panel today, these two metaphors, the column for the earth and the furnace for the world, are parts of a mnemotechnic construction. To put it like this, mnemotechnics is our method to operatively approach our techno-natural world. Let's think of the two parts of this composite Greek word mnemotechnics. The first part is mnemi, that is memory. What we want through this project is to remember the earth. Sounds Heideggerian. The other part of the composite word is technique. The technique of remembering the earth in this approach is the technique of assemblage. Assemblage, which became very challenging in epistemology after Deleuze's mille plateaus, in my view, has even a Heideggerian flavor. The basis of the technique, they wouldn't like it, both of them, you know. The basis of the technique of assemblage is what the verb to assemble originally means. It means collecting, and it means gathering. After this act of collecting, there comes the process of categorizing. It's part of the project. That is the formation of genealogies. And then, as a third part of mnemotechnic assemblage, comes the articulation of things in new forms of being. Assemblage considers memory in its potentiality to reformulate things in an ever-new order. We will see how the triptych assembling, defining genealogies, and articulating becomes active in these projects that I'm talking about. So, in Anaximander, what happens in Anaximander when he goes to Fukushima? The project called Anaximander in Fukushima, Genealogies of Technique, is a transhistoric voyage from the Aegean to Japan, the islands. This was the strainer. This is the, let's say, method of the program, of the project. This is the installation for Anaximander in Fukushima in Benaki Museum. You see the interior. It's an assembling of things that I'm going to explain. Here are the genealogies of the things. And here is the journey. You see that the pencil that we write on a map can unite the Aegean with the Japanese islands. So we are based in the idea that what we lived, as I said before, what we live today is a diachronic experience. It is both a real and an imaginary voyage. In the part of the voyage taking place in reality, extended walks in the Greek landscapes, I was walking there, took their place in territories between archaeological and abandoned industrial areas. So you're going to see the project outside the museum, the relics of these extended walks. The aim of these derives was to meet the pre-Socratic textual fragments by reading them loud in open landscapes. Here it's a Photoshop in Japan. And so this reading, I used this megaphone to read loud the text that I was interested in. And usually we practice reading by laying down on the ground, on the beach for instance, a practice combined with an instant sleep. Sleep is a continuation of thinking in the imaginary world of dreams. Reading loud, laying on the ground, and collecting relics of the techno-natural world are all mnemotechnic practices that step by step formulate an assemblage of words and objects that shape a genealogical continuation of past into present. In a slow process, a collection of relics from technical apparatuses found on the ground, on the Greek ground, shaped a collection in which, what a surprise, I discovered the genealogy of the apparatus that was destroyed in Fukushima. In other words, the discovery in these extended derives was that the typology of the TEPCO was the company, the TEPCO nuclear furnaces consist of typological elements that one can find in very archaic typologies of machinery and technical apparatuses. So this is the megaphone that I used to speak loud, and here are the collection of mostly pre-industrial or industrial relics that I found on the ground that I categorized in 3 categories. Here is the category of rings. Here is the category of frames. And you see that you can organize this. These are the frames. This is the box that inside it is the nuclear process takes place. These are the vessels. You are going to see how they are connected. A vessel like that, I suppose, is the main part where the nuclear reaction takes place. And these are rings which are, now you can see it clearly. You have the Klimt on the left, and you have the section of a nuclear reactor. You see the bottle in the middle. You see the framework around, and those two circles is you see in the exhibition. You see this life vest, which represents the ring that takes the water of the ocean and absorbs the thermic power, the thermic energy. There would be no meaning in the function of the nuclear apparatus seen as a technical fact without the involvement of what we call elements of nature, that is air, water, and the mineral to be burned in the nuclear reaction. But what happened in Fukushima, the destruction, is neither mere natural nor technical. The destruction of the nuclear reactors and the wide territory around them was an outcome of a nature-culture conspiracy. The earthquake, the wave, the melt of the nuclear furnaces form a sequence in nature-culture mega-event. In a more scientific approach, if one could say so, the genealogy of the furnaces can be included in a general framework. The genealogy of all technical apparatuses from early antiquity in the ancient furnace to the present and the nuclear reactor prove how through technique we experience the past into the present, not as a representation, but rather as a diachronic experience in our everyday practice. Remember of the bottle, for example. In other terms, the claim could be, we have always been, we play with Latour, technical, we have always been modern. And after this project, in my performative research, a new question arose. Is technical apparatus and its genealogy the only evidence on Earth for the early technicalization and mineralization of the Earth? And then I started thinking not of the technical means and their genealogy, but also I thought of natural matter, as we call it, and its potential genealogies as well. This matter, this mineral, above all, is the stone. We conceive the stone as pure matter, and we conceive it as a metaphor of the Earth by itself. It's a stone that goes on the way it goes. Then we ask for the possible genealogies of our stone mineral world. Thus, we come to the next project. So the next project is called Lithology, an interdisciplinary approach to the genealogy of stones. A short time after the voyage in Fukushima, I started thinking, is there anything like pure natural matter? And then my interest slided from objects to matter, from technical relics and means to the substance of mineralization, which is what we call stones. Are stones natural or are they cultural? Stones taken as a grand reserve for mineralization of the past, but also mineralization to come in the future, cannot be considered as natural. Not only because in very many of them a trace of animal or human history is incorporated, but also because stories are there for their potential mineralization for the future. Then here we respond to the challenge of a future science named lithology. There is a science named lithology, but we don't deal with that. Okay. Anaximander described the Earth by using a metaphor of a man-made construction, the spondylus of the column, as we said, with certain geometric and arithmetic properties. Cylindrical shape and 1:3 analogy of diameter to height of the cylinder. The metaphor transcends our physical experience of the Earth that we stand on as an experience of a pure natural substance that we stand on. By using the paradigm of a man-made cultural object, Anaximander problematizes not only the shape, but the substance of the Earth as well. We know from our common experience that stones have always random shapes in different geometrical patterns. Then, if the stone that we are all laying on is being shaped by a cultural pattern, then what would keep us away from the thought that every stone has a cultural identity? Introducing the term lithology, in this prospect of thinking, we are trying to rationalize the genealogy of all stones under the demand of Anaximander. Every stone, as long as we try to understand it, has already become a cultural object. Lithology is a potential science aiming to investigate the material world of stones as a composite phenomena of nature culture in the Anthropocene. Stones are considered to be neither parts of the natural world, nor of human culture by itself. In epistemological terms, stones are not merely the objects of geological studies, and yet they are not the objects of pure archaeological research. In geology, there isn't anything like cultural content in the object to be scientifically explored. Stones are pure matter. In archaeology, there appear, on the contrary, nothing like nature in stones. Stones are considered only as evidence for a historical or cultural process. How can we synthesize these distinct approaches? I would like to introduce the hybrid term archaeology to describe epistemological construction of a potential lithology. Very shortly, I would like now to suggest a theoretical framework to trace the field of lithology. How we conceive lithology in an intermediate field in between the geological and the archaeological. Anything can be geological. Anything can be archaeological. A cultural approach to the stone world would insist that there is nothing objective there. If so, then how is the subject of the scientific research included in the object of his or her research? More precisely, how is the lithologist incorporated in the stone world? And here we come to the project. There are two controversial paradigms of philosophical or theoretical approach to the stone world that I'd like to discuss and try to synthesize them in one by misunderstanding both of them. The coincidence is funny. From one side, the conservative, we call him now post-romantic, I love him, Martin Heidegger. From the other side, the radical materialist, Mr. Emmanuelle de Landa. In the origins of the work of art, Heidegger refers to the impossibility of getting an access to the interior of the stone. Crushing the stone in two instead of revealing its interior, the problem doubles. Access is impossible to the interior of the stones. So on and so on. Pure exteriority dominates in the cosmic space between the broken parts of stones, like in any planetary system where fragmented rocks and are planets and asteroids. This situation reminds us of the Lacanian topology of the psychic content, getting an access to the deep dark of the unconscious, where the desire for the other dominates. We find only otherness, that is absolute exteriority. Manuel de Landa, in a post-Deleuzian materialistic approach to the roots of culture, proposes a topological model for understanding the human in the context of the material world. It's his famous work, 1,000 Years of Linear History. He lets us understand culture as a process of continuous petrification and mineralization. The topology of the interior-exterior is as follows. After a long process of biological evolution, there comes the turn of the vertebrates, the ones who have bones, to conquer the world in a constant petrification of the world. This world is full of stones and bones. Cultural activity produces flesh in between the exoskeleton of the city and the exoskeleton of the human body. That happens in terms of de Landa. And this reminds a little bit, in my mind, Merleau-Ponty's approach to flesh. So, this fleshing between the exoskeleton of human body and the exoskeleton of the city, which is stone houses and fortress walls surrounding them. The deeper you get to the fleshy matter of culture, the more you reach to a petrified core, which is the bones. And when time comes for fortresses to collapse, if so, European fortress, then the earth as a single stone becomes our body's exoskeleton and the overall apparatus for global control. In a funny coincidence, both Heidegger and de Landa describe culture as a continuous process of petrification. Heidegger puts it like that. Earth tends always to draw the world into itself and keep it there. We can consider this philosophical claim as a description of culture as a continuous petrification. I like to notice this strange coincidence that affirms my beliefs. Hardcore materialism activate highly metaphysical assumptions. What we just described by the two paradigms is actually the field of work for the lithologist. Lithology is proposed to be the interdisciplinary science to confront human action in the fleshy area between stones and bones, in the thick ground of Earth, including more recently asteroids, like that we see, comets and planets, that is, the stone world in all scales, close and distant, that our planet is only a fragmented part of it. Thinking of our Lebenswelt, I would add that every stone in our hand, even our lover's body, is an asteroid, and that's why I put this asteroid. Petrification, petrification and assemblage. The more practical questions being raised in the lithology projects are: how do we assemble, classify, sensualize, experience, and articulate stones beyond the genealogies of the natural, which is the geological from one side, and the cultural, which is the archaeological from the other side? Assembling stones in the archaic method, either to build the cultural exoskeleton or to study the single elements of the world of whom we consist. Assemblage doesn't refer to the stone world as a description of its objectivity. This is the typical Deleuzian approach to assemblage, as a description of the complex social system that is followed by de Landa. We don't aim to understand the world as an assemblage, but rather to practice assemblage as a method to make the stone world be revealed. Heidegger would simply call this process of stone revelation gathering. The lithologist is the assembler. He is a mediator, an agent in the stone world. Rather than implying a general abstract scientific plan, he or she wanders in a petrified world, derive again, in a petrified world looking for proofs of petrification. It's not so difficult. The body of the scientist performs like a tool for research. He is the subject of lithic assemblage. The lithological research is organized through certain agencies, and I'm coming to the last part. So we're talking about the lithological method. Certain agencies that mean assemblage actions. We are going to describe some assemblage actions. Assemblage actions describe a lithological performativity. These agencies include: first is calculation.
Signification. A. We select a place in a quarry or on a river bed where large groups of stones are technically or naturally assembled. B. We select stones randomly as we walk and signify them with a capital letter. C. We use color sprays which are soluble in water. D. We photograph the signified letter stones and create a photo archive of the letter stones. E. We crop the letter stones from their context. F. An archive is created for the letter stones. Letters can be assembled as stones in words. Words can be assembled in sentences, and so on.
So this was the first, let's say, practice. The last word was exoskeleton in Greece. This was the calculation practice. Now we go to signification. Being practically impossible to bring all stones from the field work to the laboratory, identification and classification have to be implied in situ. In a highly entropic stone world, such as in a quarry or a riverbed, the lithologist identifies stones by signing a letter on them. Distances between the stone letters provide the potential for legal sequences able to produce meaning or not. So I'm sorry, I think I showed you.
Calculation.
It's another act.
A. We choose an extended land surface covered with stones, such as a beach. B. We use wooden sticks of a length close to the human scale in order to shape an orthogonal grid. The unit of the grid has the dimensions of an A4 paper. C. We project the grid to the ground.
It's mnemotechnics, and of course you know from archaeology how grid works.
By moving the sticks in parallel, we scan the land surface by photographing each A4 area. E. After having surveyed a piece of land, the sticks are being slightly moved to the neighboring area and so on. F. Theoretically, the moving grid can be developed continuously in an unlimited extension in the stone surface. G. The act of counting the stones is succeeded by counting them on the photocopies. Calculation.
Okay, and then we go to the next one.
Significant.
I'm sorry.
Multiplication. A stone is selected carefully from the ground. It would be good to select one that combines classical formal values with peculiarities in texture, color, traces of life, holes, etc. B. We take photographs of the selected stone from all sides around, producing an archive of all stone views. C. We crop the stone views from their context. D. Photographs are stored in different scales and sizes of the same stone. E. Using the various pictures of the same stone, we build one stone walls and one stone floors. The arrangement of the stones follows the syntactic rules of building in the gravity field.
Okay. And this is the one stone wall. And this was an installation of this one stone wall. This wall is, what is represented as stone is only one stone, and these other real stones are, you know, trying to keep this in order. And it's funny, you see this window there, this is in a very old castle in Mani, in Greece, where there were these small windows for people to fight the enemies that come into the castle. So it's this petrification world. And we come to the last, which is the disruption. The lithologist can never satisfy the desire to look in the inner of the stone, as we said before. Every new crash of the hammer on the stone, like Heidegger proposes, produces an assemblage of fragments enclosed in themselves, revealing nothing, as it happened with the initial stone before the crash. The disrupted stone reveals nothing more than the reproduction of an unsatisfied desire. This is the one. It's in the same place in Mani, which is really a stone world, a fantastic stone world. And here you can see him. It's part of an exhibition that having to do with the theme was fortress. And here we come to the epilogue. Sorry. I'm sorry. There is a video in that, but I cannot find it.
Cultivate.
Sorry. Sorry for your patience. I can't find it. It's me trying in the river, crashing stones with a heavy hammer. This is the hammer that I used. So this is a representation of the action of crashing stones on the riverbed. And now we come to the epilogue. Stones are considered in their climatic, biological, and historical context. The lithologist experiments on the interaction of stones to different climatic contexts. He selects stones from different geological or historical backgrounds and exposes them to new environmental conditions. He submerges the stones in water and waits for results. In one case, a ceramic relic taken from the western slopes of Acropolis, Athens. This is illegal. I do it as Greek, you don't do it. Interacts with the desire of the scientist. Vegetation appears and slowly grows on the surface in the ceramic stone, and you can follow that.
Cultivation. A. We walk on an archaeological site. It can happen anywhere. All sites are archaeological sites. We carefully select stones from the ancient ground. B. Back in the laboratory, we submerge the stones in airtight glass vases in a controlled environment partially exposed to the sunlight. C. We observe and note possible changes every day for a year. D. After a month or two, on a clay stone differences may occur. A smooth layer of vegetation start to grow on the surface of the stone. E. For care, we change the water in the glass vase every other week. We keep on observing changes in the vegetation, expecting at a certain point microorganisms and other species to grow. Who cares about stones?
So this was the experiment with lithology. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much. It was very poetic, I would say, presentation. Thanks. We have 5 minutes for questions, if there are any.
Well, first of all, thanks for the presentation. It was absolutely beautiful also. How you framed the nature culture conversation. I just wanted to ask you if you could say a few words about the articulation section, and in particular it seems that there are certain spatial modes that you prefer to use. For instance, in the first exhibition it appeared to be symmetry, one of the spatial modes of organizing these objects. If I'm mistaken, I apologize, but based on the pictures I saw. And then there were grids.
Sorry, there were?
Grids.
Grids, yeah.
Yes. And in the final one, we saw some form of packing. Again, I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting some of, but anyway, it seems that there are certain spatial forms of organizations that you seem to prefer when it comes to re-exposing the material. And I wonder whether you can say something about that. Thank you.
Starting from the last, which includes the others, I would say that it's not, it's a process of renting already existing formulas of rationalization of the Earth and what we found on the Earth. And the orthogonal grid, for example, is used by the archaeologists. It's still, for hundreds of years, the main process that they start an excavation. They rationalize the Earth that are going to dig and investigate by putting this grid. So the methods that I use are kind of ironic, if one could say so, comments on methods, pre-existing scientific methods that we organize our approach and our getting knowledge from the object of our interest. So it's a play with already existing formulas or patterns of approach. Talking about articulation, for me, the reactor was a very good example of how these genealogies of pre-existing typological material are articulated in new forms of technical apparatus. For me, articulation in this sense was when we have the bottle for the reaction that is combined, articulated with the system of the cooling system of the waters, and the framing, how this becomes architecture with the box. You have these boxes. So I didn't show an extended approach to this articulation, but this for me is an example of how technology, and it's banal, it's not something special to observe, but how technology works, not inventing always new apparatus, but the apparatuses, the new apparatuses are combinations in a genealogy, in an archaeology of technology, of technique, better to say. So this refers to articulation, but this interests me in my work in the sense that, sorry, after this project, I kept on trying to do combinations of articulations, better to say, of elements that I found in a process of reuse. And this led me to another project which is called DOAS, Domestic Assemblage, And I took this material, these elements, articulating them in new forms of furniture. But I didn't have the time to show this continuous process that leads to a design process. Okay, sorry.
Thank you very much. Yeah, beautiful indeed and poetic. I would like to probe this unsatisfied desire that you're talking about to look into the stone. And of course there's methods like radiography, you can do scanning of all sorts. And as you might know, you can actually represent the structure of the minerals within a stone, so that you know which specific minerals at which specific point of the stone is composed of without breaking the stone. Right? So you can do that. But the thing is that, and in that way, the stone itself appears as an assemblage. Right? So the stone, you don't need many stones for an assemblage. The stone is an assemblage of the minerals that compose it. Right? But I think that, if anything, this reflects not so much an unsatisfied desire or unsatisfiable desire, but a misconception of the idea of an interiority and an exteriority, right? So maybe we were just wrong all the way. I'm not saying anything new in that. We were wrong all the way to think that there was an inside to... And just on the side of that, I think there's some fascinating work trying to see how stones were key to the emergence of life. But that, on now, maybe we can take that into private discussion. Thank you. Yeah, so, well, there is research going on that shows that actually the emergence of life could not have taken place without not only minerals, but also stone formations. So the stone formations were integral to the sort of carbon kind of articulation out of which life emerged.
Let's go. Okay. So, I wouldn't really separate this violent process, which is crushing the stone, from the process of looking at it, if I understood well. Because basically I think that all these are symptoms of this scientific approach, archaic or even contemporary scientific approach, which may be, in a sense, it's a libidical process. It's as if you want to eat the thing. Let's think of Derrida. So what I would claim is that crushing the stone is the same as looking at it. And I remind an approach to the action of looking. In the ancient world, the Greeks believed that when you look to something, something gets out of your eye and goes to there. There is matter that goes there. So, in a way, it's a critical approach to scientific, to the scientific approach, and there is no reason for me to distinguish innocent or not approaches, bloody or scientific ones. So this is the approach. To the last part of your question, I would be very much interested in hearing from you more things that I don't know. Okay.
I would like to imagine the lithologist. Would a lithologist like a mythologist? And if not so much, what would they be quarreling about?
In a sense that the lithologist is in a process to to hear the stone speaking, as we said. In this sense, sure, it's a narration. It's pure mythology, yeah.
Thank you.
I think you didn't fully answer the previous question. I understood it this way. There are things like this Viennese cake, which is called Mozartkugel, for which you have something inside and outside, and you can speak of the interior or the exterior of the kugel. But there are other things for which these notions do not apply. And if you don't have this heterogeneity in the object itself, the notion of interior is meaningless.
The notion of interior is?
Meaningless. There is no such thing as an interior.
Yeah. This thing is not something that you say or I say. I think the Heideggerian rhetorics who use this argument are trying to say the same thing as that you say, that homogeneous matter, if I understand well, doesn't have a section. I would say it more architectonically. It's a very old problem. I think that the Arabs and but still it's a question. I mean, looking from outside, the question can exist, no matter if we know that there is not such a distinction. That's why from the ancient times, I think people were putting this question of the interior of the stone. This question arises by the fact that we know that is something there that we cannot know. Does it make sense? I don't know. Yeah. And of course, excuse me to interrupt. And of course, this is a metaphor for the globe. I mean, if you want to get to know the Earth absorbs you and your own question, the question concerning technology in a way. No, I don't know.
In this concern, at the very at the beginning, you made very clear that you follow not a philosophical approach, but a performative approach. And probably you could expand a bit on how you see the difference, because I think this says a lot about this, I think, probably a misunderstanding that is now, had now occurred. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe we could talk about the term pseudo-science or pseudo-epistemonic approach, and talk about what is true and what is not. Yeah. Okay, if I wanted to be a populist, I would say that that this is, how you say, a provocation, but I don't like this. Maybe it's something more.
So thank you very much. I propose we close this. Okay. Oh, there's one more.
Okay, maybe the time is.
Then
I'm sorry, this might be completely off topic, but I was just wondering about specifically the videos that you showed, because it seems before that the work is emotionally charged, but then this disembodied, emotionless voice that narrates the actions of the designer, let's say. Could you elaborate upon why the choice for this complete lack of emotion and this almost comic narration of the process?
Yeah,
is that an attempt at humor?
Emotions survive in cold climates, I think. In heat, they melt. And technically speaking, I was feeling ridiculous if I was the speaker, and I don't like my voice. So I chose these avatars that we all choose using the computers. So it's how Brecht is using the term distance. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Thank you.
So thank you very much.